So I'm chairing the session together with Dr. Cécile Tizot from Berkeley, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Lawrence Berkeley Lab.
Okay, so we will have very interesting sessions, topics today. We'll keep the questions for the end of the session. So shall we start with the first session?
So the first presenter is Alexis Moscoso-Real. He's going to be presenting about rates of progression to tau PET positivity in preclinical Alzheimer's disease.
Thank you. Yeah. Oops. Well, anyway. So today we're going to be talking about rates of progression to tau PET positivity as defined using an FDA-approved visual interpretation method in preclinical Alzheimer's disease. So here are my disclosures. So we've seen this paper a couple of times during the conference. Here we basically found that tau PET positivity defined again as using a clinically applicable FDA-approved visual interpretation method that is reflective of BRCA stages 5 and 6 and high AD neuropathologic change can actually be found in a non-negligible proportion of cognitively unimpaired individuals. In particular, at 75 years of age, we found that around 10% of the cognitively normal population is actually tau PET positive. And this proportion increases up to 27% if we focus on amyloid positive cognitively normal individuals. Now, this positivity, right, on tau PET is not incidental. It is actually associated with a high risk of clinically relevant outcomes at this stage of the disease. And it is particularly striking the difference between the risk of the A plus T plus group compared to the A plus T minus group, right? So this data together suggests that tau PET positivity might be the marker that marks the transition between asymptomatic and symptomatic stages of the disease. So, given the relevance of this A plus T plus stage being associated to a high risk of clinically relevant progression, right, it is important to understand the dynamics of the A plus T minus state, right? In particular, we need to understand what are the annual rates of progression to tau PET positivity in this unimpaired population with this biomarker profile, A plus T minus, right? And we don't know this yet. Okay, we don't know how many of these A plus T minus subjects progress to high AD neuropathologic change. The other question is we don't know what factors accelerate or decelerate the progression to tau PET positivity in preclinical AD. So these are the two questions we want to address in this study. So for this, we analyzed data from the A4 study, both placebo and treatment arms. We identified 253 amyloid positive cognitively unimpaired individuals who were visually negative on their tau PET scan. Again, visual interpretation was performed according to the FDA approved methods for fluortaucipir. And these individuals, all of them had at least one follow-up tau PET scan. And the median tau PET imaging follow-up time was around 5 years, and the median number of tau PET scans performed per subject was 4, which highlights the magnitude of the A4 study. This is really fantastic. We also have a subset of 218 participants who had available plasma phospho-tau 17 at baseline. And we also measure baseline uptake in the MTL, baseline tau PET uptake, using the Center C scale. And positivity was defined as 2 Center Cs, which is equivalent to the traditional 2 standard deviations over the mean of amyloid negative cognitively normal individuals. Okay, so here you have the results. So for the first time, we provide the rates of progression to tau PET positivity in a preclinical population with an A plus T minus profile, right? We found that after 5 years, only 29% become tau PET positive with an annual rate of progression of 6.75, right? So the vast majority, well, not the vast majority, but 2 out of 3 participants with amyloid, with elevated amyloid, will not develop tau PET positivity after 5 years, and therefore will not enter in the high-risk stage for clinical progression, which explains why amyloid is a poor predictor of clinical decline. Here you can see a couple of examples of how the participants progress to tau PET positivity. You can see that there is heterogeneity. Tau not always emerges first in the MTL. For instance, phospho-tau 217 sometimes is elevated before a progression to tau PET positivity, but this is not always the case. For instance, in the case on the right, you can see that this participant progresses to a clear tau PET positive scan, but the baseline phospho-tau levels were normal, and at follow-up during progression, the phospho-tau 217 levels remain the intermediate level. So predicting progression to tau PET positivity is complex, and it follows very different pathways. We also evaluated demographic factors, in particular age, sex, and APOE4. None of these factors was statistically significantly associated with increased risk of tau PET positivity over time. We found a trend for APOE4, but again, was not statistically significant. And finally, we have biomarkers that are predictive of faster rates of progression to tau PET positivity. One of them is, of course, phospho-tau 217, right? Individuals with high phospho-tau 217 levels at baseline had approximately 50% probability of developing tau PET positivity after 5 years, okay? Or conversely, 50% of the subjects did not progress to tau PET positive, even though they have a positive phospho-tau 217 biomarker. Okay, so this needs to be taken into account as well. Also important is that having elevated signal in the MTL is also predictive to progression to tau PET positivity. Remember that in the visual interpretation method approved for the FDA, the medial temporal lobe is not included, right? So this can be also used as a predictor. And again, after 5 years, we see that the risk of is approximately 50%. Okay, so the conclusions is that only 1 in 3 amyloid positive cognitively normal individuals with a negative tau PET scan at baseline will progress to tau PET positivity within 5 years. And combining blood-based and imaging biomarkers might improve identification of individuals at higher risk of tau accumulation, and this can potentially inform the design of future prevention trials. So with this, I would like to thank Stamatia Karagiani, a PhD student, my former supervisor, Michael Scholl, all the co-authors, participants of the A4 study, and the Alzheimer's Association. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexis, for this fine presentation. So now we move to the next speaker. It's a pleasure to introduce Shi Chen, that she will talk about plasma phospho-tau 217 predicting concurrent A-beta and longitudinal tau across the brain. Please.
Thanks for the introduction. So today I'm going to talk about plasma p-tau 217, which is a type of blood-based biomarkers of AD. They are scalable, accessible, cost-effective, and relatively non-invasive compared to the traditional CSF and PET-based biomarkers for AD. And among them, p-tau 217 is particularly accurate to distinguish AD versus non-AD. That has led to the very recent clearance from FDA on the very first blood test for Alzheimer's disease in symptomatic patients based on the p-tau 217 and beta amyloid at 1:42 ratio because of its high correlation with amyloid positivity. But as a phosphorylated tau biomarker, p-tau 217, its specificity to tau in the brain has been controversial. And how can we use it to inform and predict future pathology in the brain in preclinical AD is still something unclear. And one more major limitation of blood-based biomarkers in general is its lack of spatial information, which is only available in PET. So in the current study, we wanted to ask, can we estimate current AD pathology in the brain based on plasma p-tau217 level, where we explored the prediction of p-tau217 to regional burden of amyloid and tau? And can we predict future AD pathology, especially the development in the brain based on the baseline p-tau217, where we examined the longitudinal prediction of baseline p-tau217 to regional change of amyloid and tau? And for both questions, we focused on preclinical AD stage, but also validated our analyses and results in the full AD spectrum. So for preclinical AD, we used the A4 data, and for the full AD spectrum, we used the ATNI data. I won't go into the details, but all the PET scans we used are either concurrent or prospective. And for all the statistical analyses, we controlled for age, sex, and ApoE, and all results are after Bonferroni correction. So for the results, when we first looked at preclinical AD, cross-sectionally high p-tau217 was related to higher amyloid in the brain, both at the global level and also at regional level in all the composite ROIs we examined. But when we looked at longitudinal change, amyloid was not predictive, p-tau217 was not predictive of amyloid change, neither at the global level nor at the regional level for any amyloid change slope. And this was also replicated in full AD spectrum when we used the ATNI data, where cross-sectionally the global level and also regional level associations were significant, but longitudinal evidence was not there. And for tau, when we looked at preclinical AD, the cross-sectional relationship was significant for the early tau composite. And on the right, where you can see the regions showing significant track very nicely along the temporal, parietal, and occipital stream, that shows typically the early tau deposition in preclinical AD. And importantly, when we look at longitudinal association, we found p-tau217 at baseline predicted a tau change beyond just the early composite. On the right, you can see the brain-wide prediction across almost all cortical regions, extending to some late tau regions. So again, this is baseline p-tau217 predicts the cortical regional tau change across the brain in preclinical AD. And when we move down to the full AD spectrum, the longitudinal predictions were similarly robust, with additional cross-sectional relationships in later regions where when the cognitively impaired groups were added. So with these findings, one of the applications we envisioned was to basically use a single blood test, which may help us to develop an estimated tau PET-like map. So here I'm showing you on the left a brain map with estimated tau SUVR for each region at a given p-tau217 level. And on the right, it's the actual PET-based SUVR value of people around that value. So you can easily see the similarity between these two. So similarly, we also developed a longitudinal map where basically you can visualize the where tau may be expected to develop and accumulate in the next couple years given a certain p-tau217 level. So to summarize, p-tau217 was associated with current level of amyloid across the brain, but not predictive of future amyloid change. So we believe this is good evidence suggesting p-tau217 is a good marker of concurrent amyloid burden at both global and also regional level. And also p-tau217 was associated with current tau level, and in preclinical AD it was particularly significant for temporal parietal regions. And it was predictive of future tau accumulation across the brain, even in preclinical AD, which suggests its use as a good marker for concurrent early tau burden and also a predictor of future tau change. I also want to spend a little time on some next steps. So we think these are important group level associations, but as you can see, there are great individual variabilities as well. For example, there are amyloid negative individuals with elevated p-tau217 and amyloid positive individuals with low p-tau217 level. And similarly for tau, the estimation for regional burden may be inaccurate for some people because of this variability in the data. So for some next steps, we do believe it's important to understand what may contribute to any discordance between p-tau217 and PET, and we started to look into some of the discordant cases where some of the factors could be identified. So to conclude, we think p-tau217 can be used to infer regional AD pathology, especially for current amyloid and future tau. As a biomarker of the pre-tangle form of tau pathology, p-tau217 seems to elevate as amyloid rises prior to the deposition of neurofibrillary tangles that can be detected by tau PET. And also, we believe this is useful when PET is not available for estimating individuals' amyloid status and their tau stage, which is important for the identification of their biological stage. And also, it's useful for large-scale pre-screening for clinical trials. For example, for trials with a certain focus of selecting people with high amyloid, low neocortical tau, or high risk for fast tau accumulation. An ideal range of p-tau217 may help to reduce the number of PET that's needed. And with that, I'd like to thank the participants and researchers involved in ATNI and A4 that contributed to the availability of this data set. And thanks to Alzheimer's Association for giving me the opportunity to be here. And a big shout out to Hassan Moon, who is my student, who did all the work, but she can't be here because of visa issues. And the paper, however, is out, which is also shown on her mug. So please check it out. It has more details and interesting results about this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Xin. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Cécile Tuzot, my co-chair, who will talk about discrepancies in tau PET tracers in the low tau individuals. Please, Cécile.
Thank you for the introduction. So before I start, actually, I do want to mention the fact that we're going to be talking about FTP and MK signal specifically, and in this case, we're actually not sure what it binds to. So again, we'll be talking about that discrepant results that we're seeing between the two most commonly used tau PET tracers. I am a consultant for Genentech. So we've been seeing throughout this conference and also over the years that we have a pretty big variability in the different tau PET tracers in terms of binding properties and also of target signal regions. And for sure, the main focus for all of us is to have an early detection, and that would be critical for us in order to follow the progression of the disease. In this case, we're actually studying, we're using data from the HEAD study in which we have the same individuals that underwent multiple tau PET tracers. And what happened is that most of the time when we're looking at that image that you're seeing on the left, where the SUVR was from 0 to 3. And then one day, we decided to, for some reason, switch it to 0 to 2, and this is when this kind of showed up. And so we are seeing some type of signal within fluotasphere in people that are cognitively unimpaired elderly. Mainly, it's of course higher in the amyloid positive, but you can still see that it's present within the amyloid negative. However, whenever you look at MK, this is not there. So because the signal only seems to be present in fluotasphere, we wanted to compare what was happening between FTP and MK, specifically in low tau individuals. So to do this, again, we were using data from the HEAD study, and the two scans, so FTP and MK, underwent the same processing pipeline using the inferior cerebellar gray as the reference region, and we got all the visual reads for amyloid PETs by the University of Pittsburgh in Dr. Pasquale's lab, and we categorized individuals as low tau whenever both of their FTP and MK scans were below metatemporal SUVR, were below 1.5. We then transform both images of FTP and MK into one another at the voxel-wise level, doing both linear and nonlinear transformations as well as z-scoring, but I'm going to show that later on. This is the data set that we had. So we actually do now have a bit more of people within the head study, which is really exciting. But in this case, we didn't have any significant, we had significant differences where we expected it, so nothing regarding sex. We had significant differences in terms of age because we have a cognitively unimpaired young group. We then, of course, had significant differences in MMSE as well as metatemporal SUVR for both MK and FTP tracers. So I am coming back to those mean images that I was showing you earlier, and we do consider then that the CI amyloid positive are showing real tau. And the goal of that slide is that I'm going to be fading in and out that image of the CI positive on top of the other one. So you can see that the regional location of that FTP signal that we're seeing is actually where we are seeing later on real tau within the CI positive. So I'm going to have fading in and then out, and I'm going to play it again because I feel like it's always a lot of things to look at. So, as you can see, it's really in that temporal region that we are seeing some type of binding that matches what you have in CI amyloid positive later on. So we saw this and then started talking with Renaud Lajoie and Bill Jagist, and we're just like, well, what's happening? And we figured that because we're looking at mean images, maybe it was some specific individuals, or we're kind of like bringing that mean up. So we decided to do case-by-case visual reads. So in this case, you're always going to have the FTP image on top and then the MK image at the bottom. And we divided that by cognitive status as well as amyloid status. So first, looking at the cognitively unimpaired amyloid negative, you are seeing some examples of individuals that are showing some FTP signal, but not really showing much MK signal. Whenever you go on to the CU amyloid positive, it's the same thing where you have the FTP and you don't have the MK. I kind of want to point out that specific person where it's actually kind of nice to see that within the MK you're seeing some entorhinal cortex binding, but it's not really picked up by fluotasivir. However, you still had that band within the temporal lobe. And same thing with the cognitively impaired as well as the impaired amyloid negative and then amyloid positive. And it's the same thing here where you have high FTP and pretty low MK. So, in this case, what we're seeing is that despite either cognitive status or amyloid status, we're seeing for some people some FTP binding that was not there for MK. The next step was to see whether maybe by doing maybe it was just a case of not being able to see it with MK with the Calder bar or something. So we wanted to see if there was a way for us to use the MK image or the FTP image and transform it into one another and see if ever we had something a bit more similar. So you're always going to have the original FTP image on top and the original MKs at the bottom. And then I'm first showing you the linear transformation, and you see that you're still seeing some of that FTP signal here. Whenever we did the nonlinear, it's the same. You have here the FTP signal, and here within the MK, you're not seeing it that much. So everything is becoming a bit more yellow, but it's really that specific pattern that we're not exactly seeing. And then pretty much honestly out of despair, we're just like, let's try the z-scoring. So we used the cognitively unimpaired young group, and in this case, this is actually the first time that we were seeing some of that pattern in both FTP and MK6240. We also have a few individuals that had longitudinal data. So I have, it's again the mean images. You have all the baseline on top and then the follow-up at the bottom. And you can see that that signal that we're seeing with an FTP is actually persistent. So again, it's kind of a small sample. We will have 33 on one side and then 14 on the other side. But at 18 months follow-up, they are also showing that that signal. So as a summary, we can see that with fluotasivir, it does seem to present some binding in regions that are later on related to Alzheimer's disease, and it's picked up by fluotasivir, but it's not picked up by MK in people that have low tau. Whenever we did both linear and nonlinear transformation, we were not really able to replicate that signal that we were seeing. However, whenever we did the z-scoring based on the cognitively unimpaired young, this is actually when we started seeing it. So it's really unclear what this FTP signal is due to, and the reason why we submitted it to the developing topics is because we honestly had no idea what it was binding to. So if ever someone has any comments, ideas within the data set that we have with the head study, or if someone wants to collaborate, we would love to hear more about it. So happy, to, there's a question, but there's also, you can come see me after. I will be happy to talk about it. And to finish, I would like to thank everyone involved in this project, especially my supervisor, Dr. Suzanne Baker, and also all the Pittsburgh team for their collaboration and their time. And I also want to thank the Alzheimer's Association for the fellowship and all of you for listening.
Thank you very much, Cecile. So shall we move to the next session, which will be presented by Philippe Vergese, talking about MTBR 243, a very hot topic.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Today, we are sharing some results from a recent work on CSF MTBR tau 243. This is based on the sample analysis, baseline sample analysis from two phase 2 anti-tau trials conducted by Roche. The CSF MTBR assay was originally developed in Randy Bateman lab. We built on that foundation, further optimized and industrialized, then validated in our lab. We used that assay to analyze these samples, and then this is part of our broader effort to provide accessible biomarker to diagnose and stave tau pathology and track disease monitoring. So again, this is a quick overview of what I'm going to talk today. Let me talk you in next 6 minutes. Let me talk you through the key findings, starting with the assay overflow, workflow, and then the development, the validations, and then the sample analysis. So I think I'm kind of preaching to you all regarding this, but still, tau aggregates are central to any pathology, and tau spread across the brain via different forms, and which can have different conformation and propagation mechanisms, and we still don't know those mechanisms very well. The biochemical, cryo-EM, and topological studies have strongly suggested that the MTBR region of the tau is highly enriched in these fibrils and form the core of the neuropathology tangles. Actually, so our test is designed to reflect these aggregates that forms the core of the tangles. So here is a quick, very, very brief workflow. We enrich the analyte of interest with an immunocapture. Then we extract and isolate them, and then we do high resolution mass spec for the quantitation. So here is a summary of the analytical validation report of CSF MTBR. We have analyzed various parameters in the lab, starting with precision. The precision is very good, and within the lab is less than 12%. The imprecision is 12%, and within the day it's 10%. Accuracy worked across the multiple instruments and loads is again within 10%. There's no major interference, the linearity is established, and then finally sensitivity is good. The LOB is around 5 picograms and LOD is around 13 picograms per ml. Then we looked at how well CSF MTBR identifies tau PET status, and so on the left panel you can see that on y-axis is CSF MTBR tau, and then on the x-axis is the temporal meta-ROI SUVR. Correlates very well. It's 0.8 Spearman correlation. And then on the middle panel, you see the separation of tau positive versus negative on the PET. You can see is the ROC AUC is around 0.97. It's excellent concordance. And on the right, you will see the Brock stage is on the x-axis, and so the y-axis is the MTBR tau. The concentration is increasing stepwise as the PET-based the Brock staging goes from 0 to through 0 through 6. So this is the analysis of clinical samples from the two trials. Again, samples from Toriel and Laureate, and Toriel is prodromal early to mild AD patients, and then Laureate is mild to moderate, and 200 baseline samples were analyzed using our assay, and 182 of these samples had PET imaging with GTP1 tracer. And we analyzed the tau PET in two ways. One is the continuous values of SUVR, and then grouping them into low and high based on the cutoff of 1.33. Further, we had clinical measures at baseline, included CDR sum of boxes at ASCOG, ADCS, and MMSE. The same way what we did for the Biofinder study, that is previously I shown that we had 108 samples. We looked at the correlation, concordance, and then the staging. The same way we looked at the correlation in these samples. You can see on your right that both Laureate and Toriel samples are in that figure. What we are seeing is a 0.7 correlation in this analysis as well. And then if you looked at the concordance here too, again, 1.33 SUVR is the cutoff, and with GTP1, 127 out of 182 participants were tau positive, and the AUC-ROC in this case was around 0.89, and you can see both low and high, it separates well. We didn't come up with a cutoff in this case, but at least it separates really well. And then finally, then we measured the clinical measures, both in baseline. On the right, you see two panels. One is baseline, and then the other one is the slope. Again, the red spots are the GTP1 tracer, and the blue are the C2N MTBR 243. So what you're seeing is with MMSE, CDR sum of boxes, ADCS, and at ASCOG, both baseline CSF MTBR and correlated well, and the PET status correlated well with baseline clinical measures and rate of change in clinical measures. So with that, I'd like to conclude that we have a robust and reliable assay, a validated assay for detecting CSF MTBR tau in CSF, and this is validated in our lab, and it correlates very well with the PET status, and correlation with PET status and similar correlations to clinical variables as PET suggests that this is a good candidate for tau PET surrogate. And more importantly, it has high potential as a biomarker for staging AD tauopathy. And finally, Kantahori has yesterday shown the results that this particular fragment or this particular assay is specific for 3R, 4R tauopathies, so that can distinguish 3R tauopathies and 4R tauopathies. And with that, I'd like to thank our collaborators and funding agencies and friends and the C2N lab. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We'll now continue with the presentation from Eloise Kops that will be virtual, and she will be presenting about locus coeruleus, entorhinal cortex tract degeneration is associated with entorhinal and memory, entorhinal tau, and memory in ADAD. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay. My name is Eloise Kops, and I will present our work on locus coeruleus, the entorhinal cortex tract degeneration in autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease. These are our disclosures. So the locus coeruleus is among the earliest regions accumulating tau in both sporadic and autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease. So tau spreads in a characteristic pattern across the brain with accumulation in the locus coeruleus preceding tau deposition in the entorhinal cortex, which is the first cortical region with detectable tau. So interestingly, this topographical pattern of tau spread happens across regions that are anatomically connected by white matter tracts. So this suggests that tau pathology may transfer between brain regions through axonal projections, with the locus coeruleus to entorhinal cortex tract representing a critical early pathway for tau spread. So degradation of this tract could impair the ability of the locus coeruleus to regulate memory processes, resulting in cognitive decline. So in this study, we investigated integrity of this tract in vivo and its relationship to disease progression in a cohort of autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease. So we examined this tract in the Columbia-Boston cohort. So individuals in this cohort belong to a large extended family from Antioquia in Colombia. They have a genetic mutation in presenilin genes that causes early onset Alzheimer's disease. So this mutation has an almost 100% penetrance and is inherited in an autosomal dominant manner. So this is devastating to these families and shows that identification of biomarkers sensitive to the preclinical stages of the disease is especially urgent in populations with genetic variants of Alzheimer's to slow disease progression and delay clinical onset. So this illustration shows the clinical time course in this population. So disease onset is on average around age 44, a diagnosis with mild cognitive impairment. And they progress to dementia around age 50. So individuals with this mutation have positive beta amyloid PET scans approximately 16 years before clinical disease onset, so around age 28. And they have detectable entorhinal tau PET approximately 9 years before clinical onset, with tau increasing more rapidly 6 years before onset. So we used diffusion-weighted imaging scans to define the tract using tractography. So we extracted pixel-based metrics which reflect the fiber density, fiber bundle cross-section, and the combination metric. This method allows us to separate pixels belonging to our tract from those that do not at a within voxel level. The entorhinal tau was extracted from partial volume corrected for tau severe scans. Cognition was assessed with the MMSE and CERAD wordless learning task. So we specifically focused on the wordless recall element, as previous work in this population has identified this marker as showing the earliest disease-related changes. Linear and nonlinear regression models were used to test associations between tract characteristics in age, sex, entorhinal tau, and memory. So mediation analysis assessed the role of entorhinal tau in linking tract structure to cognition. This is an overview of our sample. So we included 30 mutation carriers and 33 controls from the same kindred. So 23 mutation carriers were unimpaired and 7 were impaired. The clinical status of these individuals was defined using the functional assessment staging test. So the mutation carriers were on average older, they had a lower education level and worse clinical and cognitive scores, as well as higher PET-based beta amyloid and tau burdens. So our results show that women in this cohort had a significantly lower fiber bundle cross-section compared to men. This was the case for both mutation carriers and controls. We further observed a negative association between age and tract integrity. So on the lower x-axis you see age, and on the top x-axis in these plots you see estimated years to disease onset, with 0 reflecting the median of 44. So older individuals and in mutation carriers, those who were closer to the average estimated age of disease onset, had lower integrity of this fiber tract. In mutation carriers specifically, there was a nonlinear association between age and tract integrity. So piecewise linear regression identified that degradation of this tract starts approximately 13 years before estimated age of disease onset. So the vertical blue line in this plot indicates this breakpoint, with the dotted lines indicating the estimated confidence interval, which is 28 to 33. Tract integrity was further associated with entorhinal tau pathology. So mutation carriers are shown in blue, and those with lower tract integrity had higher entorhinal tau burdens. Lower fiber bundle cross-section was further associated with worse memory performance in mutation carriers. This relationship was already evident in unimpaired mutation carriers, so individuals who are pre-symptomatic. Here we are bringing this all together in a mediation model. In mutation carriers, entorhinal tau pathology mediated 56% of the association between the cross-section of the tract and wordless learning recall scores, shown here in lilac. In unimpaired mutation carriers, tau pathology did not mediate the observed relationship between tract integrity and memory. So this direct association, shown in light gray, remains significant after adjusting for entorhinal tau. So in preclinical stages of the disease, it seems that tract integrity is associated with memory performance before it is coupled to entorhinal tau. In conclusion, our results showed locus coeruleus to entorhinal cortex tract degeneration starting over a decade before expected symptom onset. So this overlaps with time frames of previously reported locus coeruleus integrity decline and early memory impairment. So women show greater tract vulnerability than men, which is interesting since women are at a higher risk of AD and show faster cognitive decline. And poorer tract integrity was associated with higher entorhinal tau burden and worse memory performance. So this is in line with previous work in this population showing that lower locus coeruleus integrity is associated with higher tau and memory impairment, and with animal work showing locus coeruleus tau results in noradrenergic projection loss in the entorhinal cortex. Our findings have clinical implications, so the integrity of the locus coeruleus tract may be a sensitive early biomarker reflecting early tau progression in autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease. So structural changes in this tract are related to early memory decline, making it a target for early intervention to help maintain cognitive function. Many thanks to Dr. Jacobs and the Heidi Jacobs Lab and the Familial Dementia Neuroimaging Lab of Dr. Quiroz, who is the PI on the COBOL study. So this work was supported by the Alzheimer's Association and the NIH. Many thanks to the COBOL's participants, and thank you for your attention.
Now the next speaker, and sorry for the little mix-up, it's going to be from Dr. Doris Molina-Henry, and she will be talking about variations in plasma p-tau217 by social demographic factors across world region in preclinical AD clinical trials.
Good afternoon, and on behalf of my colleagues and myself, thank you for the opportunity to share our more recent findings on variations in plasma p-tau217 in the AHEAD preclinical AD study, but across world regions. These are my disclosures. And I would like to acknowledge the central teams and coordinating team that is responsible for supporting a lot of the functions of the study, as well as the extended network of clinical sites that conduct the study day in and day out, but most importantly to the AHEAD study participants, their study partners, and their families for their tireless commitment to this study. In the AHEAD 345 trials, we integrated plasma screening, which resulted in over 15,000 individuals with plasma biomarker measures globally. Previously, we have examined eligibility rates to the AHEAD 345 trials across racial and ethnic groups, specifically of individuals screened in North America, using a model that included p-tau217, A-beta4240, age, and ApoE. Despite the observed higher risk of all-cause dementia and known higher risk of all-cause dementia across racial and ethnic underrepresented groups in particular, we demonstrated lower eligibility rates on plasma amyloid among these specific groups. We now evaluate levels of p-tau217 ratio by age and ApoE across race and ethnicity, as well as socioeconomic status and rurality on all the individuals screened in the AHEAD 345 study with p-tau217 result across global regions. Briefly, the ongoing AHEAD 345 program tests lecanemab in cognitively unimpaired individuals with intermediate 20 to 40 centiloid and elevated for over 40 centiloid levels of amyloid. We evaluated p-tau217 ratio and ApoE proteotype using mass spectrometry conducted by our colleagues at C2N Diagnostics. We evaluated these levels in individuals screened across North America, which included the United States and Canada, Europe, including UK and Spain, Japan for Asia, and Australia. Linear models evaluated plasma p-tau217 by age, ApoE, and social demographic groups, including the ones listed here, such as self-identified race, Asian, Black, or white self-identification, self-identified ethnicity, Hispanic or non-Hispanic, socioeconomic status based on Hollingshead scores, which was divided into low, mid, or mid-high, and rurality based on RUCA, rural-urban commuting areas, rural versus urban. Here are the characteristics of this particular cohort of over 15,000 individuals. You can see the distribution across the different regions. Predominantly, individuals were screened in North America, but you can see the different proportions across the other world regions. The mean age was 68. About 2/3 of the cohort, of the screen cohort, were female and had approximately 16 years of education. 37% were ApoE4 carriers and had a mean p-tau217 ratio of 1.42. You can see the social demographic characteristics now on the right with the racial groups that we focused on, specifically given the higher numbers of individuals across each group. We see that the greater proportion was among, there was a greater proportion of individuals who identified as white and about 10% of Asian and Black individuals. We see as well with ethnicity that we had about 16% of individuals were Hispanic, 17 or 18% were lower SES, and less than 5% were from rural communities. At a first glance and brief glance, you can see here that the distribution of p-tau217 ratios varied across the different groups, and most importantly and more striking is the difference in the distribution by ApoE carrier and on ApoE carrier status. You can see the ApoE carriers are different from the non-carriers. When we looked at our models, our respective models by race and ethnicity, we see that the effect of race and ethnicity on p-tau217 ratios differ by ApoE4 status. And you can see this reflected or illustrated by the plots at the bottom by race on the left, ethnicity on the right. The p-tau217 ratio is plotted by age across ApoE4 carriers and non-carriers, left to right. And you can see some very important notes or observations here on these plots are that across racial and ethnic groups, p-tau217 was higher with age and among ApoE4 carriers. We see as well that Asian, Black, and Hispanic populations have lower ratios compared to white and non-Hispanics. Consistently, when we look at the effect of SES on p-tau217, we see also that it differs by ApoE4 status. We did not observe that interaction among the rural communities, and that may be in part attributed to the different distribution of rural versus urban in this population. We see once again that across SES and rurality, however, p-tau217 ratios were higher with age, as well as among ApoE4 carriers. We see that there are lower p-tau217 ratios among lower SES and urban populations. While we understand that race and ethnicity are sociocultural constructs, we decided to evaluate whether this significance in SES could be as an underlying explanation for the the racial and ethnic differences that we observed among race and ethnicity. And therefore, we adjusted for SES in the respective race and ethnic models. However, even based on that adjustment, we did not see an attenuation of the effect race and ethnicity. And with that, our AHEAD 345 screening results support group-level differences in p-tau217 ratios by race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status. These effects appear to be modulated by ApoE4. Adjustment for SES does not explain the race and ethnic differences, at least that we observe in this cohort. We have previously shown that when applying the same cut point, the relationship between p-tau217 ratio and amyloid is similar across race and ethnicity. And this finding in particular may reflect actual differences in prevalence of elevated amyloid among these groups. A potential lower amyloid prevalence may point to other pathological processes as drivers of greater risk of cognitive impairment in these specific populations. There are, of course, limitations in this particular analysis, given that this is cross-sectional data, and this is a clinical trial cohort with limited representativeness across SES and rural categories. Future evaluation is imperative to understand underlying reasons for lower prevalence of elevated amyloid in these populations. And we surmise that the potential contributing co-pathologies, as well as social determinants of health, may have key implications for the future of prevention and treatment of disease in Asian, Black, Hispanic, and lower SES populations. And with that, thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much. It was a great presentation. So now it's time for the next speaker, which is Dr. Coral Wheeler, who will be talking about longitudinal relationship between systemic inflammatory markers, plasma SOTA181, and internal tau PET.
Just to clarify, I'm still a graduate student.
Okay, well, no problem.
Hi, my name is Coral Wheeler, and today I'll be talking about the longitudinal relationships between systemic inflammatory markers and tau PET. and we have no conflicts of interest to disclose. And we'd like to kindly ask you to refrain from taking pictures and videos as this data is preliminary and this project is still underway. So systemic inflammation may be characterized as high circulating levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines that may originate from conditions such as chronic disease or in older adults age-related inflammatory changes and cellular damage. And pro-inflammatory cytokines may have dual effects on tau, in some instances helping to clear tau, whereas other instances helping to promote tau accumulation. However, the timing and manner in which these roles take effect are still unclear. And so the objective of our study is to investigate the separate relationships between plasma inflammatory markers, IL-6 and TNF-alpha, which are widely expressed in aging and Alzheimer's disease, and their relationships with tau PET signal in both early and advanced tau regions over time. And so to conduct this study, we used 218 ethnically diverse, non-demented older adults from the Health and Aging Brain Health Disparities Study. As you can see in our demographics box, the non-Hispanic white participants tended to be older, while the Hispanic and Black participants tended to be younger, have more female participants in their study samples, and the Black participants also had higher rates of ApoE4 positivity. We used tau PET scans from at least 2 time points, spanned across approximately 2 to 3 year intervals between each time point. We used plasma levels of IL-6 and TNF-alpha that were obtained around the participants' baseline tau visit. So only baseline tau plasma markers were used in this instance, given that follow-up plasma markers were not yet available at this time. Initially, we looked at associations between inflammatory markers and tau in the entorhinal cortex. We then expanded our analyses to looking at composite regions of interest across the brain, including medial temporal lobe, posterior cingulate, and lateral parietal tau. And so using linear mixed effects models, we found a trend level association between higher IL-6 plasma levels and higher entorhinal tau accumulation over time. We also use linear mixed effects models to look at associations between inflammatory markers in our composite regions of interest, and we found a trend level association between TNF-alpha and the change in posterior cingulate tau. More specifically, higher TNF-alpha trended towards an association with greater tau accumulation in the posterior cingulate. And so we wanted to further understand these relationships between inflammatory markers and tau accumulation, and we looked into potential mechanisms that may be mediating these associations. So the kidneys are essential organs in clearance of materials out of the bloodstream and clearance of waste out of the body. And kidney functioning can be estimated by a measure called estimated glomerular filtration rate, or EGFR, which estimates kidney filtration capabilities. And so with higher EGFR values indicating better kidney functioning, with lower values indicating worse kidney functioning, and the lowest values indicating kidney failure. And so previous Alzheimer's disease literature has found that lower EGFR values and specifically patients with chronic kidney disease have higher Alzheimer's disease biomarker levels. In this instance, these studies have looked at cerebral spinal fluid, so higher cerebral spinal fluid, phosphorylated tau, and lower CSF amyloid beta 42 and 40, indicating likelihood of higher brain tau. And so we hypothesized that EGFR or kidney functioning would mediate the relationships between inflammatory markers and change in tau. And we conducted a mediation analysis, and we found that EGFR had a trend level mediation effect in the association between TNF alpha and posterior cingulate tau accumulation. Specifically, higher levels of TNF alpha were associated with higher posterior cingulate tau with lower EGFR, accounting for some of this relationship. And so in summary, in the entorhinal cortex, higher plasma IL-6 trended towards higher tau accumulation over time. In the posterior cingulate, higher plasma TNF-alpha trended towards higher tau over time, with EGFR accounting for some of this relationship. And this research suggests that healthy kidney functioning is important in the clearance of Alzheimer's disease, promoting systemic inflammatory markers, and may be involved in tau biomarker outcomes. And with that, I would like to thank my lab, all of the graduate students and research assistants in my lab, specifically Dr. Meredith Brasky, who is my graduate advisor. I'd also like to thank the ABS HD team and all of the participants that devoted their time and efforts to this study. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that great presentation. It's now my pleasure to introduce my co-chair, Mark Soares-Calve, talking about clinical performance and effect of preclinical variation of plasma p-tau217 alone versus plasma p-tau217 A beta 42 ratio for the identification of amyloid pathology.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the presentation. So today I will be presenting data of a multi-center study that was led by Roche Diagnostics, and in which different academic centers, including BBRC in Barcelona, we participated. And it was evaluating plasma phospho-tau217 and plasma phospho-tau217 a beta 42 ratio. As you know, there is a little bit of a discussion of whether it's better to use the phospho-tau217 alone or the ratio, not only in these platforms, but in many others. So I will discuss this topic today. So let's start thanking to all the people that participated in this study, once more led by Roche Diagnostics, but then in which many academic centers we participated. And this is the disclosures of the different co-authors and mine. So what is the objective, the main aim of this study that I'm presenting today? So the idea is to evaluate the diagnostic performance, but also the real-world applicability of phospho-tau217 in plasma compared with the ratio. So all the data that I will present to you will be always comparing these two biomarkers in order to detect, of course, amyloid pathology in both cognitively normal and cognitively impaired individuals. So I think that we all know now that plasma phospho-tau217 is a great biomarker with a high accuracy to detect amyloid pathology, not only in people with symptoms, but we have a lot of that also in people that are asymptomatic. But there is also some data, some studies that suggest that using the ratio 217 a beta 42 can have some advantages. For example, if you use a two-cutoff approach, it reduces the individuals that fall into the intermediate zone, and of course then this is very useful to save confirmatory test. It may seem that maybe it's less affected by some comorbidities like renal function, but we also, many of us know that have been working with plasma biomarkers, that a beta 42 has an issue with robustness of the measurement. It's more affected with pre-analytics and analytical issues. So this is something that we need to take into account. So for these purposes, the aim of this study was to measure both phospho-tau217 and the ratio in different cores that here are represented. So we have here, it's not working, well, the different cores in which the study was performed, and the measurements were done with the Lexis platform, 217 again, also with the ratio 217 and a beta 42, and the main outcome was amyloid status defined by amyloid PET or by the CSF phospho-tau181 a beta 42 ratio. Then we, of course, we do some calculations of ROC curves in order to detect that into the curve. And then in the end, I will also show studies about the pre-analytical sampling, which is also very important, especially for the beta 42. So this is the demographics of the course that were included. This is a very busy table. Just I wanted to show here that most of the cores, that I don't know why there are not the names, but these are different cores. But on the right side, you have in the first column the pool data of the cognitively normal individuals, and in the very late and the last column, the cognitively impaired individuals. I will present all the data, always pulling this data. And this is most of the participants are very early, or they are cognitively normal, or some of them are cognitively impaired, but in the MCI stage. Okay, so let's start with the results, with the data. So on the top you have the results of phosphatau217 in the different cores. Now here there is the labeling, and on the bottom the ratio. And this part we have the pool data of cognitively unimpaired and cognitively impaired. So as you see in blue there is the amyloid negative, in orange the amyloid positive, and in both cases 217, and the ratio is increased. But here the important thing is to look not at the p-values but at the effect sizes. And if you look at the co-ND of the differences are not very different, or at least the ratio does not increase the effect sizes between amyloid positive and negative. So this is the message. So there are not much differences in the effect sizes between amyloid positive and negative using 217 alone or using the ratio. Let's go to the areas under the curve. Here there are the different cohorts. In blue you have phosphatau217 alone, in orange the ratio, and here we see quite a lot of variability among the different cohorts. So in some cohorts, like for example ours alpha in Barcelona beta, the ratio 217 beta 42 is slightly better than 217 alone. But this does not happen in other cores. Actually, in other cores, it's just the other way around. So when we look at the pool data in the bottom, in cognitively normal and cognitively impaired, we see that there are not much difference. Actually, even in cognitively normal, the ratio phosphatau217 beta 42 seems to be worse than 217 alone. So overall, we cannot say that really the ratio is better than 217, and in some instances it can be even worse in this data. But there's, as you see, there's something cohort dependent, because it's quite different depending on the cohort. So this is the pool data. Let's look now into the different performance metrics. So if we look, again, this is a very busy slide, but here the take-home message is that sensitivity, specificities, and predictive values between 217 and the ratio are not very different, but there is a difference, as has been shown with other platforms, in the individuals that fall in the intermediate zone. So in cognitively impaired, what we see is that with the 217 alone, there are more people, 12.9% of the patients that fall in this intermediate zone, while this is lower in the ratio. These differences do not occur, however, in the cognitively normal. Then something which is extremely important in the analytical field, which is to test the short-term sample stability. So this is a very simple experiment in which there are 15 samples in which they are measured at different times, at different hours. You have it in the horizontal axis after the blood is sampled, and then you have in the vertical axis the measurements and how different are from the baseline. So on one side you have the 217, and you see the measurements do not change even if the measurements are done hours later taking the samples, but the ratio changes a lot. Actually, it increases 400%, so it changes a lot. This is a little bit attenuated if the sample is kept at 4 Celsius, but still with the ratio, as you see, that there is an increase on the ratio that is quite significant. So this, of course, have consequences. So if we introduce this variability due to the timing, then we can recalculate the sensitivity and specificity of 217 and the ratio. And what we see, you can see it in the phosphatau217 beta 42 ratio graph, that particularly the specificity, goes down. And this, of course, can be problematic. This can mean that someone that was defined as amyloid negative, if the sample is measured later on, that person can become amyloid positive. So this is a false positive due to this low specificity, and of course this is an issue to take into account. So in conclusion, what we see here is that the ratio, although it may have some advantages, does not clearly improve. It does not provide an additional value, at least based on this data, than phospho-tau2 alone. The ratio has less robustness compared to 217 alone. So what we see here, that the implementation of the ratio could lead even to patient misclassification. So this is something that needs to take into account. So again, based on this data, this data supports that the implementation of 217 in the clinical real practice. Thank you very much to all participants, especially of the Alpha Core and all the cores that have participated. Thank you.
Thank you so much for such an interesting presentation. I will finish off with Dr. Marisa Denkinger, that will be presenting about the comparison of 4 fully automated platforms for the measurement of plasma p-tau217 in the AD continuum.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. So I'll be presenting our work on a comparison of 4 fully automated platforms for the measurement of plasma p-tau217. I have nothing to disclose. So multiple head-to-head studies show that plasma p-tau217 outperforms other biomarkers in detecting both amyloid and tau PET positivity. So this makes this a reliable plasma biomarker for Alzheimer's disease. And these studies using plate-based research assays have all shown highly reproducible p-tau217 performance, but to date there's been no direct comparisons using fully automated platforms. And given the proven reliability of p-tau217, the next step is being able to scale this into routine care and prevention trials, making fully automated platforms essential for widespread clinical adoption. So although these plate-based assays have been really valuable in biomarker discovery and validation, they come with significant workflow limitations. So each 96-well plate must be run in batches, and it requires hands-on pipetting, which can introduce variability. And a lot of these plate-based assays are also confined to specialized or research labs. And that brings us to fully automated platforms that have the ability to bring p-tau217 to clinical scale. So these platforms can run up to 450 tests per hour with very little hands-on work, and they're already installed in many routine hospital labs. And with the recent FDA approval of the LumiPulse p-tau217 A-beta42 ratio, this is really paving the way for adoption of these fully automated platforms. So our goal of this study was to compare amyloid PET prediction across 4 research use only fully automated plasma p-tau217 assays. So the 4 platforms we looked at were the Cobas from Roche, the LumiPulse from Fujifilm Bio, the Italica IM from Siemens, and the DXI 9000 from Beckman. So for the samples were processed on the Cobas and LumiPulse in our lab at Banner, and the samples for the other 2 platforms were processed at the respective companies. Our second aim was to evaluate whether p-tau217 longitudinal change is consistent across platforms in cognitively unimpaired individuals. So this is the main study cohort was the Wisconsin Registry for Alzheimer's Prevention and ADRC, as well as some subjects from Yale University. So in total, we ran 6,259 plasma samples on each platform, and this included both cross-sectional and longitudinal time points. And we had 802 individuals with amyloid PET scans. And 672 of these were cognitively unimpaired, and 130 were cognitively impaired, and this included subjects with MCI or AD dementia. And just to note, we haven't processed all of the samples on the DXI 9000, so when we show these results, it's from a smaller sample size. So the first thing we looked at was the prediction of amyloid PET using a Centiloid cutoff of 24.1. So on the left, we're showing cognitively unimpaired individuals, and we can see across all 4 platforms high discrimination with AUCs ranging from 0.91 to 0.94. We did see that the Cobas had the highest AUC in cognitively unimpaired individuals, and we also saw that adding A-beta42 improves the AUC compared to p-tau217 alone. And on the right-hand side is in cognitively impaired individuals, and we see that discrimination is still high across all platforms, and there were no significant differences in platforms here. So these ROC profiles suggest that these fully automated platforms can reliably detect Alzheimer's disease or amyloid pathology, and that this can happen in cognitively unimpaired and impaired individuals. Next, we use a two-cutoff approach to classify subjects into different categories. So this chart is showing the proportion of subjects that are categorized into low, intermediate, or high, and these are just based on preliminary cutoffs. But you can see the LumiPulse has the smallest intermediate zone, meaning there are fewer indeterminate results. So the other two platforms have a little bit higher intermediate zone. We did see if you add the A-beta 42 to the p-tau 217, the intermediate zone shrinks a little bit. Next, we looked at longitudinal change. So here we're showing plasma change over time in amyloid-positive individuals in blue and amyloid-negative individuals in green. And I'm not showing the Beckman data here just because it's a smaller sample size, but we saw very similar results on that platform. But we're seeing faster annual increases in amyloid-positive individuals compared to amyloid-negative individuals across all platforms. The Italica had the highest beta coefficient in amyloid-positive individuals. But across all these platforms, we can see a good discrimination between amyloid-positive and negative individuals. Next, we looked at whether individual changes in p-tau 217 correspond to concurrent amyloid PET centilloid change. So each dot here is representing a paired plasma PET visit for a given individual. On the left is in amyloid-negative individuals, and the right amyloid-positive individuals at baseline. So you can see across these platforms that plasma increases correlate with PET centilloid increases, and this relationship seems to be stronger in the amyloid-positive group. In the COBOS E801, we saw stood out in the amyloid-negative group. You can see there's less intersubject variability on this platform, which could help to minimize false positive results. So if you look at the LumiPulse in the amyloid-negative group, you can see there's a few individuals that have rising p-tau 217 values, but they have relatively stable PET. So if you were using this as a classification, this might misclassify someone. In the amyloid-positive group, we see almost identical trajectories across the four platforms. So this really supports the interchangeable utility, especially in amyloid-positive individuals, in maybe monitoring preclinical progression. So to conclude, we see that all four automated p-tau 217 tests achieve high AUCs for detecting amyloid PET positivity. So their future potential for clinical use looks strong. Again, this performance is similar across all platforms, both cross-sectionally and longitudinally. So we really think any of these could be clinically useful. And these fully automated platforms will enable large-scale screening and support widespread clinical application and efficient trial recruitment. So our next steps are we're looking, measuring p-tau 217 and A-beta 42 longitudinally in 30,000 cognitively unimpaired older adults on the COBOS, and we'll be incorporating biological variation estimates from our DRAW-10 study to define stable change thresholds and prognostic cutoffs. We're also hoping to use these trajectories to set sample size and endpoint recommendations for primary and secondary prevention trials. And there's a lot of people to thank here. As you can tell, this is a huge amount of work. So to thank everyone in the Fluid Biomarker program led by Nick Ashton and all of our amazing lab members who were able to get all this work done. And also just to thank the wider Banner Health Network and all of our industry and academic collaborators, and Sterling Johnson at the University of Wisconsin for helping us to get all of these samples. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Marisa. So the floor is now open for questions. As a reminder, you can either come to the microphone or you also can submit questions through the Q&A in the app. And everyone is present because we also have the online speaker.
Is there any question here in the audience? I think, yes, number 5.
I'm Teng Fei from Shenzhen Bay Laboratory Center in China. So I have a question for the CSFE MTPR tau243. So it's good to see that there are good concordance between the CSFE MTPR 243 and the tau PET. So I'm wondering, did you also check the concordance between CSP tau 270 and the tau PET in the same data set? is the result significantly different from the CSF EMTPR 243?
I think, yeah, that's a good question. And so in this particular data set, we have not looked at 217, but this has been published, Candace's work and Randy and others, that has shown specifically that there is the relationship actually changes a little bit once you go from Brock stages from 3 to 4, 5, because the linear relationship become non-linear actually for p-tau 217, and MTBR appears a little bit later in the stage and becomes more linear as the stage progresses. And so in this particular data set, no, we have not looked at, but that's what we are seeing at this point, at least in the trajectory, yes.
Okay, thank you. I have another question for the differences of a plasma p-tau 217 in different races.
I'm sorry?
Because I know, for another speaker.
Okay.
So I noticed that the white population have a higher plasma p-tau concentration across age compared to the Asian population. So do you think the cutoff we defined for the plasma p-tau 217 based on the white population could be applied to the Asian population, or we should define a different cutoff for plasma p-tau 217 for different population?
Yes, and that's an excellent question, and I didn't go deeply into that, but based on our eligibility data, so we looked at individuals who were plasma eligible on a single cut point, on a single threshold across all of these populations, and we really were emphasizing a very liberal threshold at the time with very lower cut points. So our expectation was for an individual to be at 20 and above, and we started with 11 centiloids. And we then evaluated amyloid PET on all the individuals who were actually moving from the plasma based on eligibility to PET. And we found that there was no difference by group once they've met that plasma cut point. And so that's what I was alluding to, that once you meet a certain plasma predictive cut point, the eligibility is the same, and so is likely the relationship with plasma PET.
Okay, thank you.
We have another question there, number 3.
Hello, James Stokey from Australia Enable. Mark, lovely presentation, and everyone, thank you all for your great presentations. But Mark, I have a question for you around the prevalence of amyloid per population there. It seemed like maybe the difference in prevalence was explaining why there was such an inverse relationship between p-tau 217 or the ratio being better. But it looked like it was borne out then in the cognitively unimpaired versus the impaired population, whereby in the impaired it was slightly better, but I couldn't quite see if it was significant. Can you care to comment?
Yes, of course, the prevalence of amyloid positivity can change among cohorts. For example, in alpha it's enriched, and a third of the individuals are amyloid positive. However, this is important when calculating the predictive values, in which, of course, they are very dependent of the pretest probability, that is the prevalence of amyloid pathology. But the other, the curves, the sensitivity, the specificity should be not especially affected by the prevalence. What may affect this is I would say the effect sizes, because probably in cognitively unimpaired individuals, the differences of any biomarker are not usually as important or as high as in the cognitively impaired, and then this means that probably it's more sensitive to any kind of any variability, and maybe it's because of that the ratio is more affected. That's just a speculation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Number 5.
Hi, Robert Risson from USCHRI. Great session. Phil, quick question for you. I thought you mentioned at the very end about the differences of the assay being able to detect 3R versus 4R tau. Was that in contest talk yesterday, or where can I hear more about that? Because that's very interesting to be able to separate those with this particular mass spec assay. You know, those are very similar, right, 3R and 4R.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. That question is, again, this is a poster kind of presented. It's so important, actually. And what we are seeing is 243 EMTBR is very specific for 3R and 4R mixed pathology, that is on AD, CTE, and certain mutations in FD, LD. And so other than that, in 4R and CBD, PSP and PIX diseases, this is not showing up at all. Basically, that's increasing in 4R, 3R, 4R, AD, CTE, and all, but in other pathologies, you don't see that. Yeah.
I understand. So it's not that you can differentiate 3R versus 4R. It's that you see
Correct.
3R,
Yeah.
4R,
Yeah.
and then it's the absence of
Yeah,
3R
absolutely.
only. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks
Great.
very much.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah.
Have a question here, Tariq?
Mark, for you.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't remember if you showed the performance of the beta 42 by itself, because you have a big variability between the performance of a beta 42 if you take different methods, mass spec, or I would like to know the performance of a beta 42 itself in relation to the other beta 42, and do you think this is true? The results that you find is true for the beta 42 of Roche, or do you think this is translate for other beta 42s, or maybe if you take another one better, would have a different outcome? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so I can tell from our data on the alpha study, of course I don't know at least in detail of other course data, but what we see in the alpha cohort is when we use a beta 42 with different platforms, with Roche, also with the CMO assay, it's quite good to discriminate between amyloid positive and negative in cognitively normal, and especially if you use the ratio of beta 42/40. So it's quite good, especially if you use as an outcome the CSF as amyloid positivity more than the PET. That's what we usually see. Having said this, when we look at the robustness, and we can do that just artificially, just introducing random variability, then we see that the accuracy of a beta 42 drops. So this is, I think, the issue. My take in general is that if you have the conditions to do everything perfect, you can have the control of all the pre-analytics, analytics, you have doing an unicenter assay, maybe having a beta 42 can be an advantage. But if you have the control of that, otherwise, then you are introducing a lot of variability, and at least you have to take this into account. But that's a personal opinion. Thank you.
Hi there.
Hi, go ahead.
I have a question for Mark, I believe.
Okay.
First of all, I'm an engineer in the room, so I shouldn't have opened my mouth, but I'll try. You talked about temperature instability for p-tau217 over A-beta 42. I was wondering what's the source for it. I couldn't understand why the ratio assay has more temperature instability compared to the p-tau217 or the singleplex A-beta 42.
Yes, well, this is what is fine in the experiment. So it's an experiment in which 15 samples are taken, and then the measurements are done at different times, 1 hour, 3 hours, and different hours. And then you do the measurements, and you then refer to the minimum time. And what you see is that really the values changes, especially with the ratio. So it's not very robust in that sense. So the fact of having it at 4 Celsius then attenuates these changes.
Okay, so that's instability coming from the sample being stored at 4 degrees or from the panel, the multiplex panel?
Well, this is the pre-analytics. So the thing is that the pre-analytics affect the measurements. Okay. That's what I would say. What is the exact mechanism? I don't know, but it is affected, the measurements.
Okay, thank you.
So
there are some questions online, and there's one for you, Marisa. Someone is asking how old were the samples that were tested with the different p-tau assays?
How old were the samples?
Yes.
I think they ranged. So some of them were longitudinal samples, so I think they're anywhere from a couple years old to 10 years old. So yeah, it was a range.
Great, thank you. Kind of continuing on that, you or any other person in the panel, is there any specific diurnal timing and processing time which could affect the results that might be positive and negative, and do we know if there's a best timing?
I don't know. I don't know if anyone else has.
I believe this is all platform specific and what analyte you are looking at, and we have done a lot of pre-analytical studies, looked at the analyte instability, as Tariq was asking about the A-beta, and also from there we know that we've been working with A-beta for the last 15, 18 years, and A-beta 42 is absolutely a sticky protein. It's basically, even with a few hours, you can start seeing that the levels are going down. And so, but the ratio maintains, and that's a good thing. So it's all specific, and what antibodies you use, what platforms you use, and the timing around. Is it 1 hour? The sample processing is. Are you centrifugating within 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, or is it stored in 2 to 7 degree, or immediately frozen? All depends on the different conditions. So.
I also would like to ask a question to Alexis. You show Alexis very nicely. So it was 29%, if I remember well, of the individuals that A plus T negative that evolved to tau positivity. And you define some characteristics like age, sex, ApoE4. Is there any other demographics, or clinical feature, I don't know, for example, vascular burden, that predicts the progression to tau positivity?
We didn't analyze these factors yet, but I don't anticipate large effects from, I don't know, vascular factors or others. It would be more like, phospho-tau biomarkers and potentially centiloid values, continuous centiloid values as well. But yeah, other demographics is difficult to me to see, right? Maybe ApoE, if we are better powered, there might be some effects, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. We still have time for one last question. No?
I do have one actually for Dr. Melina Henry. Did you explore, or was it did you account for sex differences within all your data, or did you look into this also?
In the initial analyses, they did account, and we are going to explore that further. But we did not detect that these did not necessarily go into these specific models. So we will look into that further. Yes.
Thank you.
So I think that with that, thank you very much to all the speakers. They were really terrific talks, and thank you very much to all of you for listening.